So to go back to the colonists one more time, yes, they brought this lovely tradition back with them from Europe and England to the colonies. This is evidenced by the Salem witch trials in 1692. They brought with them the idea that bodies belong to God and the state, and they also brought with them the whole idea of uh, alchemy and the idea that the explanation to bad things happening to them had to do with unseen forces rather than germs and things that could be shown through science. Now, I didn't ask you to read the selection by Cotton Mather at the very, very end of the last section, Literature to 1700, but it's only about 3 pages. It might be really interesting to you because it contains testimony against a Martha Carrier who was on trial for witchcraft. This interest in witches, witchcraft, and witch trials had a long, long history in the British Isles and Europe. And of course, usually it was strange old women in the town or somebody who one person had a grudge against that ended up being brought to trial on such charges. But it wasn't just regular uneducated folks who believed in witchcraft. King James, the same King James who sent people to the New World and who the Jamestown colony was named after, believed in witches too. He was going to sail, actually he did sail to Denmark to pick up his wife, and ran into a bunch of storms on the North Sea. And his explanation for it, or somebody told him an explanation for it, was witchcraft, that someone was casting spells against him. And of course, even though he's an educated person, of course, has tutors through his whole life, he believed it. He believed it so much that he wrote a pamphlet called Demonology, all about witchcraft and finding out about it. So it wasn't just the common people who believed this stuff, it was the people in power too. In 1692, all those years after the foundation of the colonies, the colonists had executed 19 people for witchcraft, at least 19, and hundreds more were put on trial. People were suspicious of each other and their neighbors. It was a horrible time. This is a drawing of Giles Corey, another one of the accused Salem witches, who refused to enter a plea. And because he didn't enter a plea, he was pressed to death. In other words, they piled rocks on top of his body until he died, and it was slow. If you're interested in this subject and in the Salem witch trials, then I would recommend renting the movie The Crucible if you haven't already seen it. Very good. The play is by Arthur Miller. Gives you a little bit of perspective and character development on some of this, and I'm sure it's available on Netflix and whatever video store you go to. So, do I think that these people were bad people? I really don't. I think that they were good people. who were kind to their neighbors and that they really lived the Christian life. But back then, they were in this culture of the state always knows best. They were fearful. They had no scientific knowledge. One current theory of what happened to the girls in the Salem witch trials, such as the one that I played, was that they had ergot poisoning, which is a mold that grows on rye grain, and it causes hallucinations. I think just the fact that there's excitement, that something is going on. Their lives had to be pretty dreary, and they worked very, very hard to just maintain the basic necessities of life. And if they had a bad crop one year, they could die. And when I went with my parents when I was younger to Massachusetts, and I have had family who has lived there for hundreds of years, actually. And we went to visit some graveyards, and you would see in this graveyard whole families buried within days of each other of disease. And life was hard, and it was dull, and it was tedious, and it was difficult. And so if people had a little excitement, well, if you didn't know anybody, how can you really blame them for getting wrapped up in it? In addition, this was culturally normal. It just wasn't anything that they thought about. They didn't think that things could be any other way, because that's just the way things were. Sometimes in our culture, we explain things by saying, well, that's just the way things are. Is it the way things are, or is it the way culturally we have situated them? We think of ourselves as unique individuals with our own opinions and capacity to make our own decisions. But are we really, or is that something that our culture tells us? I don't know. But this is what I would like you to think about as you read the literature. Who are you? Who are you in relation to your period of history and the culture you live in? And finally, their bodies were not their own. If somebody was accused of witchcraft and the state brought them to trial and the state accepted evidence, the state is God's arm, basically. And so, of course they're going to believe it, because their bodies don't belong to God. Their bodies don't belong to themselves. They belong to the state, and the state belongs to God. So of course they're correct.